we're working out some kinks because this is a wonderful new renovated space. And so working out sound and lights and so on is proven to be a little bit of a challenge, but we're getting there. Okay, thank you all for coming. What a fantastic crowd. We have among us, we have quite a number of elected officials from the state level, from the county level, from the local level. Don't talk to each other because it'll be a violation of open meeting law. We also have a tremendous outpouring of support from the leadership of private development and consulting firms. And I'm particularly pleased about that because sometimes these events have a feel of being, oh, that's government stuff. And then the private side stays away from it. And that's what we're trying to overcome here. And so by your attendance, you're taking the first step. So thank you very much for that. We also have quite a number of representatives from committees and boards that are related to economic development and infrastructure development and our lovely wastewater problem on Cape Cod and all of those related issues. And that's a lot of the substance of what we're going to talk about. So thank you as well for that. So let's get started. Our moderator, we're privileged to have the Senate President here as our moderator today. Very appropriate. She obviously has done a tremendous amount for economic development in her district and across the state, for working with the public procurement law and with open meeting law. And so with that, I will pass it to Senate President Therese Murray.
Thank you, Chris. For those of you standing, there's 3 seats right up here. I know no one likes to be up front. And there's another one over there. There's a lot of people. You're going to stand through this whole thing. Okay. Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you all for joining us here in Sandwich in this beautiful, newly renovated town hall. As Chris mentioned, we're here today to discuss how we can use the already close working relationship between the public and private sectors to develop our local communities. We have seen numerous results of such partnerships right here in Sandwich. On April 2nd, 2010, the bill creating the Sandwich Economic Initiative Corporation, or the SEIC, was signed into law. And I was happy to file that bill in the Senate on behalf of Sandwich as part of my continuing effort to streamline economic development in Massachusetts. The SEIC promotes all that Sandwich has to offer for economic development opportunities, focusing on small businesses. It's tasked with the promotion of redevelopment and reuse of unused, underused, undeveloped, and underdeveloped areas in Sandwich, with a mission of promoting the common good and general welfare of the community and residents. I also assisted efforts for the town to update its local comprehensive plan through a grant from the Massachusetts Office of Travel and Tourism. Promoting economic development is the key to getting our economy back on track. And we all know that cooperation between the public and the private sectors is vital to that development and the solution to a faster recovery. But as we continue developing our local communities, we must do so with an eye both on current and future needs. This is why we should be proud of the smart planning undertaken by our communities. The Bourne Financial Development Corporation and its Green Campus and Buzzards Bay Main Street revitalization projects are great examples of this. Through smart growth, vibrant and economically viable downtown areas like Mashpee Commons are the antithesis of suburban sprawl, and finding huge success with mixed-use centers based on traditional architecture and historical neighborhood planning. And this makes for a more desirable and efficient use of land, transportation, retail, and housing options. And I didn't realize they were going to be here, but my own hometown of Plymouth, and Dennis Hanks is here with all the public-private partnerships that we are working on in Plymouth. So I hope you'll pick up one of these. He's over there at the end, little commercial. It means a downtown with a community feel that encourages people to live, to gather, and to shop, and to keep their doors open. This region is a leader in public-private partnerships that breathe new life into their local communities. So we have a lot to be proud of, but there is still a lot of work to be done. As we all know, one of the most pressing issues here is our wastewater infrastructure on the Cape. One of our panelists will be discussing this issue in more depth, but something that we are all aware is a time-sensitive problem. the costs are significant. And because we're getting less federal money, not more, that means our state funding is going to be also greatly diminished. We need to work together to formulate a wastewater treatment plan for the Cape region, and as that project advances, we need to ensure it is completed in a thoughtful manner with input from the community and in partnership with the state. This legislative session, we will continue to address loopholes and trim the Commonwealth's budget and advance major reforms and continuation of our reform agenda. The transparency and ethics reforms we passed last session have encouraged increased communication between the public and private sectors. We also passed a major overhaul of the state's network of agencies charged with developing business interests and economic activity in Massachusetts, and Senator Karen Spilker and I authored the legislation which creates a streamlined model with built-in transparency measures to reduce redundancy and waste and promotes a more business-friendly environment that will ultimately help stimulate job growth in the Commonwealth. We need to get lean, improve communication, and start growing businesses, creating jobs and building a stronger Commonwealth. That's what that overhaul does. And while we were working on this legislation, I was also working on a different angle, a more grassroots way of promoting our Commonwealth and our businesses internationally. A group dedicated to making Massachusetts the gateway for Europe into the United States, and Northern Ireland the gateway for Massachusetts companies into Europe. This effort began with a 2009 invitation I received to be the keynote speaker at an EU conference on connected health, which took place in Belfast. I accepted the invitation to speak, and when I got there, I realized a few things. First, I was the only elected official from the United States that was there. Second, Massachusetts is seen as a worldwide leader in healthcare technology and medical device innovation. And third, European companies wanted to work in and with Massachusetts. There was an opportunity here for our state to build and strengthen economic bridges into Europe, and that we had an obvious conduit for the European market in Ireland, both the North and the Republic, so we set to work. I, with a couple of my staff, the Massachusetts Tech Collaborative, the Massachusetts Life Science Center, and a group of individuals based in Northern Ireland, including Invest Northern Ireland, Queen's University, and University of Ulster, started a group to help achieve this partnership called NIMAC, Northern Ireland Massachusetts Connection. Since forming this group, the interest and response have been remarkable. Shortly after our second meeting here in Boston last fall, Finland joined the group, eager to look at partnership possibilities with Massachusetts, not just on healthcare technology, but on other various areas of marine research and development. In fact, they are so interested in these efforts and hitting the ground running, the Minister of Employment and Economy and the Minister of Social Affairs and Health have sent an official invitation for us to bring a delegation of companies, university representatives, and representatives from various organizations to travel to Helsinki this April. We're in the process of finalizing the delegation, which will include the chancellors of UMass Medical and UMass Dartmouth, Massachusetts Medical Device Development Center at UMass Lowell, Partners Healthcare, industry organizations such as the Massachusetts Medical Device Industry Council and Mass Biomedical Initiatives, and companies such as Pfizer. In addition to the increasing interest in Finland, the province of Catalonia in Spain is also looking to be a part of this collaboration. And we've received interest from the European Commission, who has now opened up some of their grant money so that the first time U.S. companies can apply for grant money from the EU. The bottom line is that people want to be here. Businesses want to set up shop here, and we need to harness that interest into real opportunities. There is a lot of buzz out there, but our goal has to be to turn that buzz into business. It seems counterintuitive to many, not in this room, but now in a downtime in economic activity is when we have to build up these kind of economic development efforts. We have to continue to strengthen the intuitive relationships between the public and private sectors. And together, we will continue to retain and grow our existing businesses and work to bring more new businesses to Massachusetts. And to talk more on how we can strengthen and use this partnership, we have a very distinguished panel of speakers. Our first panelist is Richard Norman, Chief of Staff of the National Council for Public-Private Partnerships. Rick has over 30 years of experience in management and development of national associations and has authored numerous articles in trade and special interest press. His areas of expertise include organization and program development, public affairs, and government relations at both the national and international levels. Thank you for joining us today, Rick.
This is an impressive turnout. I'm really pleased to see all of you here, particularly after having read, Chris Bailey suggested I take a look at your Sunday edition of the Cape Cod newspaper. Very enlightening. I understand the challenge you're facing. And let's see if I can offer something that may be a bit of an approach to answering some of that question, or some of that problem. Senator just made reference to some of this. You know, you've got deficits at the federal, state, and local level that you've got to deal with. Simultaneously, I think practically everybody here wants to have a balanced budget somewhere down the line. Their infrastructure needs, and that's what this thing is all about. Some of the stuff has been postponed. Some of it has been because of political decisions, sometimes just deferred because of other options that had to be taken. Governments are going through cuts in services. I live in Washington, in the Washington, D.C. area, and right now we don't know if the government's going to be open next week. So these are really challenging times. But I think what we're trying to do today here is improve the understanding of an option. What might be a way that, in part, could be the answer to some of your concerns. One of the things we have as a bit of an advantage about public-private partnerships is over the last couple of decades, we've seen more and more use of them. Case in point, Plymouth. And from those, we learn how to best put these partnerships together. It's not an easy task, but at least we've got examples of successful partnerships that might apply to the situation here in Sandwich. First thing I want to explain is partnerships are not revolutionary, number one. Number two, this is not privatization. I hate that word. It's misunderstood, misused, et cetera, et cetera. Just because the private sector is involved in a partnership doesn't mean it's privatization. Privatization is when the asset is sold to a private company. They maintain, operate, control. In a partnership, the public sector maintains an enormous amount of control over the whole project, and that's important. This concept is not new. I noticed Sandwich was founded in 1637. Guess what? That's also the same year that the first public-private partnership was used in the United States. It's the Mystic River Bridge going into Boston. So there's a long, long tradition behind the use of partnerships. And we've learned over the years how they can be effective. No, they don't answer all the challenges, but I think they could be an important option and a valuable tool in meeting some needs. And I'm going to try in the next couple of minutes to give you some framework to work with. This is a definition. It's on our website. Pretty straightforward. It's a contractual relationship between a public agency and a private sector entity. Now, there's a couple of people we've got United Water, AECOM, and a few other private sector firms around, and they will explain that in a lot of these partnerships, you've got 2, 3, 4 companies that are working together. Somebody who's doing the engineering, somebody who's doing the design, somebody who's doing financing, etc. They all work together in these partnerships. And the object is to share the skills and the assets of each sector so that you're working in partnership, not dominated by the private or either side. And the idea is not only are you sharing the rewards, you also have to share the risks. But it's an important combination to get the best out of both sides. At the National Council for Public-Private Partnerships, we deal with all kinds of partnerships, and we find that there's some commonality. It doesn't matter if it's transportation, wastewater, urban development, energy, financial, social services. There are some common key factors. As a matter of fact, there's a flyer back there that kind of outlines some of what I'm going to say here and give you a sense of what those commonalities are. Understand that first and foremost, the private sector brings some key resources to this equation. My favorite example of this is these obnoxious little things. I remember the first mobile phone that I ever had weighed 52 pounds. It sat in the trunk of my car, and there was a handset, you know, up in the center. And then Judge Green came along and said, you know, AT&T, you're too big. We got to break you up into 7, and we're going to talk about the baby bells, et cetera, et cetera. And that unleashed competition. This is 8 years old. I know there are people in this room that have got things that are a fraction of the size that do 20 times what this thing will do. That's one of the benefits of competition. You get management efficiency because Ma Bell versus Baby Bell versus Southern Bell, which ones are more efficient are going to succeed in the marketplace. So they learn how to refine and do things more efficiently. The same thing is true with the use of new technologies, workplace efficiencies. All of these things are driven by what is going to satisfy the customer base, what's going to satisfy and make that company more successful and productive. That's half the equation, half the story. You can't have a public-private partnership without the public sector. The public sector is the party that has the legal authority to do this. That's a very important control mechanism. It also has an open procurement process, and you just had some reference to this a few seconds ago. You've got to be totally transparent. You don't want any little side deals with, you know, my favorite story is a couple of years ago, a Mexican delegation came in and we're giving them a briefing on public-private partnerships, and they had an example of a water plant in Tampico that failed horribly. Great concept. Pemex was going to pay for most of the water, allow the urban population to get water at a reduced rate, but the project fell apart. When I asked him, probed a little bit into the background, I said, well, how was the contract awarded? Was it a competitive process? No. Well, who was it awarded to? The governor's brother? Did he know anything about building water plants? No. Did he have financial resources to build it? No. No wonder the thing failed. But you need an open, transparent process like you have in the procurement process in Massachusetts to make sure that you get the right party and the right fit for the particular project. Public sector also has the broad perspective. What needs to be done first? This isn't just purely an economic decision, it's a social needs question. Dedicated personnel. I met with the town manager and really, there are people trying to make this thing work, and you got to respect that. The other thing that is buried frequently, don't think of it, there are capital resources beyond dollars and cents. We'll talk about underutilized assets in a few seconds. The secret is how do you balance the public and the private components for the best benefit for the public? And it's a balancing act. It really is. The advantages of using a partnership is you're taking the strengths of each sector. Certain things the private sector is better at, certain things the public sector is better at. You combine them in the best possible mix. You reduce development risk, you reduce the amount of public capital that's going to be needed, and that's critical in this wastewater challenge. Maximize excess or underutilized assets. Allow a commercial activity to occur on a publicly held land without transfer of title, and in exchange for that, you can receive, my favorite example is the public schools in Virginia. They've got a statute that allows underutilized assets to be used for commercial activities, and in exchange, the private company will build, at no cost to the public, a new school. So far in Virginia, 200 of them in the last 8 years. That's a lot of schools at no cost to the public. I understand there's discussion about a library around here, but I'm not going to get into that. But the point is, if there are underutilized assets, think of that as a potential part of the equation to get to the final point. There are 6 keys, and I'm racing through this. I've been known, at one point, I gave this presentation as a 16-hour lecture, so this is a little difficult for me to compress this into 10 minutes, but I'll work on it. There are 6 keys. The first one is the political and legislative environment. You're not going to be able to make a step forward unless you've got the political leadership and a legislative environment situation that allow for it. The fact that Plymouth has a partnership for a wastewater plant clearly illustrates, yes, you've got the statutory environment. What is needed is the political leadership. And I sense that this community is working on that. And there's the old common adage, There's nothing worse than the general who marches out in front of his army and turns around and finds out the army is still a half mile behind him. Political leadership requires developing constituent support. We'll get into that's another one of the keys we'll get to in a second. But that political leadership is critical in making partnerships successful. Second, you've got to have a public oversight agency, an organized body, a dedicated unit, a group of people in the public sector that are monitoring this project to make sure it's doing what you want it to do. Don't let the private sector go off and do it all entirely on its own. It's got to be spelled out what has to be done, but you need to have a public agency monitoring, watching this step by step. And sometimes you find that some of these projects get a little bit more complex than might be normal for the public officials to have dealt with. Don't hesitate to hire consultants or assistants to make it a little bit more likely that the outcome is going to be what you want. My favorite example of this is in Washington, D.C., they had a piece of land that had potential for economic development. The city agreed that, okay, the developers came in and said, we'll give you $30 million to help build a new metro stop right next to this land. The land will develop, flourish, etc. Yeah, they were right. It went up 600% in real estate values in 2 years. The mistake the city made, because they had not had the experience, they didn't do a market assessment. They could have easily said to the private sector, 30 million is not enough. How about 60 or 70 million? And this was for a $90 million project. Everybody agrees now that that skill and expertise did not exist at the public sector, and if they had retained it and paid maybe $20,000 for a consultant to come in and help them, they would have picked up another $30 million. That's a pretty good return on investment. Don't hesitate to hire expertise if you need it. Third, you got to have a contract. There are enough lawyers in this room. Details, but you don't want it design specific, you want it performance specific. What do you want to have accomplished? And you put down measurable goals that this unit can account. Is the contract going as expected and wanted? You want a contract that's performance-based. You want one that's on best value, not necessarily lowest price. We're back to that Mexican water plant again. Risk allocations. All of these details have to be in this contract to assure that it serves the public needs. Here's the tough one. This is not philanthropy. You want philanthropy? Go call Bill Gates. He'll pay for your system. Just stroke a check and boom, you've got everything you need. The key on this is going to be you can't expect the private sector to provide a contribution, a philanthropy in building a wastewater system. But there are ways in which you can spread the cost out so that it has minimal impact on the community. Ways that you can defer costs, and the most common example is that private sector will come in, take on the initial financial capital cost to build it, and spread the cost out over 20, 30 years in an operation maintenance contract. That is probably one of the most common forms of it. There's also tax increment financing. There's a whole variety of mechanisms and tools that we don't have time to get into today, but it is not just solely a matter of user fees. There are a lot of other ways in which the revenue stream can be generated for the private sector to have them pay for the initial upfront cost and then spread it over a longer period of time. Underutilized assets, here we go again, is another example of where that revenue stream might come from other than individual taxpayers. Stakeholder support. Now we're back to the political leadership. Everybody in this room, everybody in Sandwich, everybody has to understand, why is it going to be done this way? What are the values? What are the upsides, the downsides? Open discussion. My favorite example of this, I live in Northern Virginia. Recently it was decided that the Beltway, Interstate 495, was going to be expanded. They're going to put some tolls on some lanes, and immediately the public had a misperception. What do you mean you're going to put a toll on my freeway? It was built with tax dollars, Dwight D. Eisenhower promised, et cetera, yak, yak, yak. Fine, we've got 4 lanes north, 4 lanes south, but they're going to add 2 more lanes to it, and those 2 more lanes will be tolls. They'll be high occupancy toll lanes. There was a lot of misunderstanding at first, but VDOT, Virginia Department of Transportation, the private sector, and the local officials went on a major education campaign and explained to folks, no, we're not taxing, not putting a toll on the existing road. We're only going to put the toll on the expansion, on the additional roads. Public opinion went from 70% opposed to the project to 65% in favor of it in 3 weeks. That's how important stakeholder communications are. People have to understand what is happening and why it's going to be done. Last but not least, got to make sure that you pick a private sector partner that's the right fit for your project. Just because somebody can build solar panels doesn't mean they can build wastewater systems. Some companies can do both, but you want to make sure that the company has the skills and capabilities to meet what the public sector is looking for. You got to also remember what is the motivation of each of the sectors. What's the public sector's motivation? What are they looking for? What's the private sector? And when you put together the request for a proposal, does it reflect those concerns? That's just a quick shot at what are some of the key steps in a public-private partnership. But I go back, leadership is absolutely critical. You've got to have a regulatory and legislative environment, which you have in Massachusetts, and you also need good counsel in getting through the whole process. It's not easy. It's probably the most complex form of contracting available. And anybody who's been involved in it can tell you some of these contracts run to, you think the Encyclopedia Britannica is big? You should see what the contract for some of these transportation projects run at 300, 400, 500 pages for the contract. But it's worth it. If it fits for your needs and it fits within the bounds of what you're trying to do, doesn't answer everything, but it can be a major option that should be considered in going forward. With that, let me turn it back over to the Senator.
Thank you, Rick. I think one example that you immediately will come to mind is the design build on the Central Artery project, that public-private partnership, except the leadership allowed that the public part of the oversight to disappear, which is why the cost went up and why there wasn't enough, there were no state engineers at the end overlooking that project. Our next panelist is Thomas Miller, Vice President at Kavanaugh Advisory Group in Danvers. Tom is an expert in architecture, urban planning, economic development, and real estate development. Prior to joining Kavanaugh in 2007, Tom was Director of Economic Development for the Boston Redevelopment Authority, the BRA, and principal and owner of the Miller Group, a consulting firm focused on revitalization projects in urban cores and cities throughout the Commonwealth. Thank you for joining us today, Tom.
Thank you for inviting me today. This is very special for me. I don't know if many of you know, but I grew up here. And this space that you're sitting in now, my parents used to go to the dances during World War II when this was a dance hall. So we're dancing now, that's for sure. But it's special for me. And as the Senator said, my experience has transcended a whole bunch of different professions, starting in architecture, going into urban renewal and urban redevelopment, serving in the public sector for a major city in the Commonwealth, major city in the Commonwealth, and finally in the private sector. And so my experience has been to see how all these pieces go together. And it's very important. What Rick was talking about a few minutes ago is exactly how the process has to work, I can tell you. And I'm going to show tonight, or today, 3 different projects. Now, none of them are wastewater, so you're going to lose out on that one. But they're all projects that required a connection between the public and the private sector, and how the state can really help push development forward. You know, we all hear today about budget deficits and all these things, and job creation has been driving our economy for so long. It's amazing that we lost sight of it in some ways. And we have to focus back on it now, because it is a real problem. We've got to expand tax bases. We've got to do things to make the economy grow stronger. And So I'm all for job creation, and that we'll be talking about this tonight. But a lot of these projects here were driven by that. One is a housing project, which is just to sort of analyze how the government actually can help us in the affordable housing end of the world. But the other projects are driven by job creation. And so let me start that. And the slides are simple because I went to Sandwich High. We didn't do anything really tough there, okay? No, I love Sandwich High, don't get me wrong. I graduated, I'm here, so I must have done something right. The first projects, they're all in Massachusetts, okay? And the first one is the Worcester Medical Center. If you've ever been to Worcester, the big medical center that sits in the middle of downtown Worcester. Now, people, some of you may not remember, but that was a big vacant parking lot with a chemical company and a liquor store and roads traversing right where that hospital was. And that was one of the first urban renewal projects to be refunded in 40 years. It's not my phone, so whoever that is. And that took an incredible process of politics, getting the political entities to buy into doing something that was discredited in the 80s and 90s. If you all remember, urban renewal had its heyday in the 60s and in the early 70s, and it started to destroy itself. It cleared and never rebuilt. It never looked at how to use those powers that urban renewal provided, and which are still on the books for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I may add, how those powers can be used to create things. And that's what that first project does. The second project is in Chelsea. Now, this is an interesting project. It was a site that had been attempted to be redeveloped by the city for 20 years. And every time they came up to the issue, they couldn't get the political will, they couldn't get the financial withal to try to put it together. And this was an interesting project because it took the urban renewal powers again, layered them with economic development incentive program, or TIF program, if you will, and private sector development, and created an opportunity which this site, many of you will look and say, well, what's the big deal? Well, this site is going to be the new FBI headquarters. It was announced recently. It will be on this site that hasn't been built yet, obviously, but it created the opportunity for certain things to occur. And the last one is one I'm working on right now, which is a 90-unit affordable housing project in Danvers. Now, many of you know, in a lot of communities, we get the impacts of 40B, and the fact is that we need more affordable housing. This looks at 100% affordable housing, and how do you do that without with providing the subsidies that you need to do to make that work? And subsidy mean reducing the rents so that it's affordable to many more people than what we have on the marketplace. So it's going to look at all three of those. So I'm going to take you through all that, but I want you to realize that each one of these requires a partnership. Each one does. You cannot do this alone. And what people say, and developers say this all the time, and people I work with say, why do I have to get development, the government involved in this thing? There's such a pain in the neck. Let me just sneak it through in the middle of the night. Well, those days are gone, okay? The people that do that are the ones that are going to fail. The projects today have to be up front. They have to have a sense that you're bringing the community into the project. If you don't, they will fail. They will fall apart on you. And you'll find that 2 or 3 people that are angry about something can really hold things up. City of Boston is a perfect example. You can spend years trying to put a project together, but when you try to take the shortcuts, or you try to go around, or you're not up front, it comes back to bite you. And I can tell you that from personal experience. So let's go to the next one. Worcester Medical City. Now this is interesting. What would you do if a hospital came up and said, you know what, we'll put $250 million into downtown Worcester, we'll take 2,600 jobs and we'll put them right downtown so to help you downtown altogether? What would you do? Well, that's what Worcester ended up with in 1991. They were confronted with that. They had no way to get that project downtown. They looked at all kinds of things. They looked at sending straws, people in there to buy land and assemble it, and it never worked. So what they did is they went back and they hired me, actually, but that's beside the point. They went and looked at the old laws, and they found laws, and they found opportunities, and they looked at those. So out of that $250 million private investment, $42 million was a grant through the state urban renewal development grant. It's not a bond. It's funded every year by a vote of the Senate and the House, signed by the governor. It's an allocation, and it was done through that program. Now, on top of that, the local community wanted to make a commitment and did make a commitment. They created tax increment financing, economic development incentive program, came out around the same time. So what did they do? They went in and they committed a significant amount of money in tax, rebates, if you will, or abatements, if you will, so that that hospital would invest that money in there. And finally, the private investment of $250 million. Let me go back a little bit. I don't know how to go back on this. One more. That's it there. The red line is it's 26 acres of land, and that gigantic thing with all those, that's the hospital. If you've been in there before, it's an amazing hospital. The railroad runs through the middle of the building. Underneath, there's a big waterfall in there. If you go in there, the railroad ran right through the middle of the building. We had to design the thing around the building. And there used to be, at the top of the slide, there used to be an at-grade railroad crossing there. And so the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, through the State Department of Transportation, provided a significant amount of money to take that at-grade crossing out, put a bridge there. There was a signature bridge designed by a famous architect in Connecticut. So all these things had to come together. That site would be sitting there vacant if all those things weren't pulled together. And the problem is that a lot of people think you can just do these things. They can't. They need a real driving force, whether it's political, and it has to be political. They have to agree to do this. But there has to be staff members and people that can push something forward like this. This is not something that you can do a lot of times with the existing staff you have. Not that I'm saying you have to, but you have to bring in people that know how to do these things. And that's key. If you're going to make these kind of investments, you got to find people that can make them happen. The Everett Avenue Urban Renewal Plan, 60 acres of land in Everett, on Everett Avenue in Chelsea. If you know Chelsea, it was called Ragtown one time because it has a lot of junkyards and it's a very gritty place. The smallest city in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I may add. And at one time went into receivership back in the, 90s, I think, because of its financial problems. This project was done right after it came out of receivership. So we had to convince the public that, in fact, this was a good investment. And this is interesting. We did an urban renewal plan for this as well, but we didn't ask for a state grant. We used the powers of the urban renewal plan. We created a tax incentive program, which I think is on here, tax increment financing. And then we got a hotel to invest. This is the Wyndham Hotel, the first hotel that had been built in Chelsea in probably 20 years. Now Chelsea is unique because it sits near the airport, right near the city, and it should have things going for it, but it didn't. So you have to really look at what are the things that are driving this and not allowing the development to occur. But again, that was probably a $25 million investment on the part of the hotel. It's doing great. And right to the right of that slide, right to the right of that picture, is going to be where the FBI building is going to go. So. And finally, Conifer Hill Commons. This is one property that we own. It's almost 6 acres. It's a tough site, right near 93, I'm sorry, and near a mall. It's kind of nice because it has all these support things around it, and it will give us an opportunity to actually have support services that would help support the housing. And the interesting thing about it is 90 units. It won't work unless we get the following things. Low-income housing tax credit, federal program administered by the state. Okay, huge, because what it does is people buy those credits and that's how you get the equity into the deal. Subordinate loans, those come through Department of Housing, Community Development, home funds, those things. You cobble those together. CDAG is a part of this infrastructure grant that you get. So you get Community Development Action Grants administered by DHCD, Department of Housing, Community Development. And finally, the private investment. You have to reduce the costs to the point where you can take out a note and the income will pay for it. Because you have lower rents, it requires you to have this other investment on the part of this state agencies. If you don't, you won't have the housing going there. So finally, I'm doing this quick, because I don't want to hog this thing up. Going alone is not realistic anymore. The idea that you can just do something, it doesn't work that way. With all the environmental issues, the agency reviews that are required, and the fact that you want transparency to some extent, you're not going to be able to sneak things through any longer. Collaboration happening all the time today. I think anybody that tells you that they're able to go out there and do all these things is just fooling themselves. This is really, today, whether it's tax credits, whether it's mass development, whether it's, you name it, you're always looking for those things. And the funniest thing about this is people say, well, it's only because the developer doesn't want to spend the money. Well, that's really not what's going on. Think about the economy today. You have rents getting lower because of what's going on, the value of the property decreasing, so it makes it almost impossible to be able to really put something together without some help, without some thoughts. And that's why it's so critical that government looks at doing those things. And finally, I don't see it changing very soon, that all of a sudden you're not going to need these partnerships. It just isn't going to happen. These things have to come together that way. The margins are too small now. And people say, yeah, he makes 30% on each deal. You don't make 30% on each deal anymore. Those days are gone. And now it's really looking at how do you make an investment that's smart, it's not outrageous, but because you use the public money, it's going to become transparent. And that's really a good thing, in my view. So I appreciate your rapt attention here. And there'll be a quiz later on. And if they say anything about a town hall proposal from 40 years ago, don't believe a word they said. But I will say that my proposal for this building was for it to be an exhibit hall and a place to meet. When I was in college, I did a study to redo this, this whole area, this town hall. And the idea was to make this exactly what it became. And I commend the town for doing that. This is a great thing. Thank you.
Another boon from the Worcester project is that they are now building in the same complex the largest DNA stem cell repository. Okay. And Harvard will be moving their stem cells there, and that means that scientists from all over the world want to live in Worcester, which is pretty amazing in a short period of time. So thank you, Tom. And speaking with us next is Stephen Torres, the Corporation Counsel for Fall River and the city's chief counsel in all litigation and transactional matters. Stephen is a former U.S. Air Force officer and previously served as the city solicitor for the city of Taunton. He has been an author, editor, and lecturer for Massachusetts Continuing Legal Education and a national panelist on numerous legal and municipal associations. Thank you for joining us, Steve.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Can everybody hear? Okay, thanks. I was asked to talk about the procurement and contracting issues associated with public-private partnerships and also review some successful case studies that we've had here in the Commonwealth. I don't like to use little mnemonic devices or cliches, but I was forced to when I thought about how to begin this presentation and what we would contain in our remarks today. And I thought we'd do the ABCs of PPPs because the primary components begin with A, B, and C. And I didn't realize that until I was writing a couple of weeks ago, writing this up. And I said, all right, we'll do that. I'll do what I don't like to do, because being in law and politics, I'm quite often forced to do what I don't want to do. So the ABCCs, we have the authority. The key to public-private partnerships, in some states, they're very easy to do. Some states, they are made more difficult by procurement law and certain statutory frameworks that have to do with the delivery of government service, contracting for the delivery of government services, and contracting for the construction of public facilities, whether they be public works, public buildings, public parks. We have some procurement laws in Massachusetts that provide protection to communities, but at the same time hamper some of the development of public-private partnerships. There's been significant progress made over the last decade in opening up the procurement laws to recognize the concept of best value, which I'll talk about later. Best value being the most innovative and most successful and most effective approach for public-private partnerships or competitive service delivery models. So the authority, you have to look to existing statutes of general applicability, you have to file home rule petitions, or you have to look at one of my favorites, which is statutory exemptions. Quite often there is a statutory exemption that might apply to your public-private partnerships. These are common in the solid waste and recycling industry. Another method of combining statutory exemption is by using Chapter 30B's allowance for government agencies to contract amongst themselves without certain procurement requirements, and then transferring properties or assets to a quasi-government agency such as a redevelopment authority, such as a Sandwich Economic Incentive Corporation. Redevelopment authorities have have considerable leeway with respect to how they procure services and how they transfer and convey property for projects. So authority goes right to your statute. Define your project and then try to fit it into existing statutes. If it does not, then we have to file the home rule petition. And the legislature, I don't want to speak for the legislature, but when it comes to economic development, it comes to jobs, it comes to doing for something the community wishes to do through the home rule petition, as long as that home rule petition provides adequate protections for public money and public interest, then you can probably successfully get a home rule petition through to do your public-private partnership. And we've done a couple of those that I can talk about later. So that's where we begin, the authority with doing the public-private partnership. Next is the beneficial purpose. That's what we're all here to talk about today. And this sellout crowd essentially says, we're all looking for an opportunity to use the public-private partnerships for some beneficial purposes. Those beneficial purposes, just some of them, I've identified here as economic development, competitive service delivery models. Who remembers this? I know the Senate President will. This is what the Weld administration called privatization, competitive service delivery models, and across the country it's referred to as that. Used to have it was a positive expression to put on what some thought was a negative connotation. But as our earlier speaker noted, that the privatization is not always the loss of public jobs, it's the improvement of services through public-private partnerships. We see that often in the healthcare industries with its private management and public employees. So competitive service delivery models can quite often be a beneficial purpose of PPPs. A very good example, and we'll talk more about wastewater and water later on because that's an issue here on the Cape. One very good example of the competitive service delivery models is the management of water and wastewater plants by private companies. Now, we do a lot of things right in the public sector, and police and fire are perfect examples. Water and wastewater, it's very difficult when this is our only plant to be on the leading edge of the industry, to have the competitive bargaining and buying power for supplies and services and emerging technologies. Quite often, that type of unique operation that is singular to your community but common in an industry is a good example to look to for competitive service delivery models. And provided you do that with the labor protections in there, what we call in the labor circles, follow the work provisions where people remain employed, the competitive service delivery models sometimes can be looked at positively by the public employees. I recall in New Bedford a couple of decades ago when I represented the unions down there, one plant was privatized, the other wasn't, water versus wastewater, I can't remember which one. But the union employees in the non-privatized plant we're looking to privatize because of how well the operations were going in the privatized plant and how good the private employer was. So sometimes the competitive service delivery models can be welcome all around and have least resistance. Finally, another beneficial purpose, management of municipal infrastructure and development. And this is one of the keys I talk about later on in the presentation. One of the benefits of public-private partnerships is the opportunity to have a little bit more leveraged financing, have a little bit more capital investment that doesn't go up against your bond ceiling. And one of my favorite things, of course you'll say he's a lawyer, of course that's his favorite thing, is other people's money. When we go into public-private partnerships, other people's money is a good opportunity. And then finally, there's your A and your B, authority, beneficial purpose. Your C is the contracting and procurement principles, which I'll try to go through now. Under authority, we talked earlier about general legislation, procurement exemptions. I have to say the legislature has done an outstanding job in the last 10 years of accepting design build in water and wastewater and accepting alternative delivery models in public constructions for vertical construction of buildings, being the construction manager at risk. They're recognizing that public-private property, public-private partnership, and best value selection is something that can serve the public interest. I have always been, and I never miss an opportunity when I'm speaking, to talk about the low bid procurement law. Low bid procurement law is a difficult law because of the way companies and subs are certified and allowed to continue to permit to construct and to build and to bid without a fair report privilege, which is something we need in Massachusetts law. I need to be able to call Dedham when I've got John Q. Pipeline Company bidding, and I know I heard they did a horrible job in Dedham. Dedham's got to be able to tell me they did a horrible job, and even though they're certified and they're qualified and responsible and eligible, I can say, no. It's very hard to do that in Massachusetts. There's always been a reason for low bid because of public trust and public money, and the old thought that when these laws came into being, those of us that remember when these laws came into being, it's because there was abuse in the public contracting system, much like my fellow speaker said in Mexico. It really doesn't happen anymore. It can't happen anymore because we have a code of ethics in government, and nobody wants to be in a situation they're awarding contracts to my cousin Vinny. So we can get away from low bid into best value and fair report. We do that in public-private partnerships. So that is some of the issues with authority and statutes. Again, as I said earlier, define your project and find your category of a statute that allows you to do it, or file the home rule petition, or again, work with a quasi-government agency to transfer, such as a redevelopment authority. This is the genesis of successful public-private partnerships, the procurement process. The procurement process needs to focus in public-private partnerships on best value selection, a combination of price and a combination of technical qualifications. Traditional design bid build, as I said, there are problems with in the competitive services industry. In the professional services industry and the combined procurement like design build operate, low bid does not work. You want to know the qualifications, both technical and financial, of the vendor that you select. So alternative project delivery is the better method. Design build operate, design build finance operate. The lower two are less of the PPP because you turn the entire operation over to the private vendor. You can maintain obvious elements of control, and we'll talk about contracting principles, but design build turnkey is a lot like our earlier speaker talked about, a true public-private partnership where there are aspects of participation, management, and operation in the entire process. So once you build the wastewater plant, you may have public employees operating. Once you build the public marina through a design build, you may have the public operating it. That's something we're working on in Fall River. One of the case studies I'll talk about briefly later. So procurement process, best value, design build, finance, operate. That is how we effectively use procurement to achieve public-private partnerships. I apologize if I'm going fast, but I do want to get through all these slides. Okay, fundamentals of procurement. We've gone through the statutory authority. Your local authority is important as well. who has at the local level the authority to contract. In towns, you have your town charter and state law. In cities, it is generally the executive branch of government with approval of the legislative branch, which is a city council. And when you get to the towns, you get this magical thing that I grew up going to in New England called the town meeting. And I think that's where I got my earliest experience with government, was going to town meeting and realizing that people could speak their mind and have their own opinion. It was very much unlike school. So town meeting was a great opportunity. And you could ask questions. I can remember when I was 5 years old, and from the older my generation and above will remember when we were little and you could all of a sudden you could eat meat on Wednesday. On Wednesdays and Fridays during Lent, I thought it was the greatest thing. So I asked the nun, I said, sister, now that we can eat the meat on Fridays, what happened to everybody who's burning in hell because they ate the meat on Fridays? I don't think I asked another question of another teacher. I don't know, she had the biggest hand. She grabbed me by the bow tie and the suspenders all with one hand and said, it's a mystery. Town meeting is a mystery, but so town meeting is a wonderful event. So that's why I'm glad that most of my clients have been cities. Delivery method selection, we talked about the fundamentals of procurement, traditional alternative delivery. If you're building a park, sometimes a traditional design bid build might work, but if you're building a public marina, that redevelopment of the waterfront area, you might want to do the design build finance operate, or design build with a turnkey back to the municipality. Technical team, this is key. Pick qualified people. I'm not going to push council because I am council. I usually push engineers. So years ago I used to sit on the conservation commission, and a lot of times the citizens who come in by themselves with complex problems, wetlands problems, but very simple things they want to do in a garage, they'd say, do you want to, should we hire an attorney? And a lot of the attorneys in town didn't like me because I'd always say, don't hire an attorney, hire an engineer or a land surveyor, because they know everything the attorney has to know, and they'll save you a lot of money. You want to get the right team together. Yes, it's important in these complex delivery models to have good counsel, as our earlier speaker said, but it's even more important to have very competent people on your design team, on your joint venture team, on your finance team. You have to have a good team together from the municipal side to evaluate and select the joint venturers that are going to do your project for you. I cannot point you in the direction, although I've worked with so many of these, of the best engineering firm. I know who's good out there, but I can't always tell you for this project, this firm would be best. But when I have an owner's representative who does engineering and construction, he can help me sort out who those people are. When you have owners' representatives that have worked in the finance industry, they can make sure the Wall Street brokerage or the financial firm that comes to the table as one of the proposer's team members is actually competent and is not selling you some joint venture, one of these capital startup company bill of goods that they have great ideas, but they never work. So these are the things you want to do with proposal evaluations. Request for proposals, just give you some idea to include all the background materials. If we're doing a wastewater treatment plant, we want to give all the backgrounds of the current flow data of the plant, the performance data of the plant, recent upgrades, future upgrades, any design estimates for future upgrades. Those are all the things you want to include as background materials. If you give a proposer the most information you can, and again, this comes from using qualified engineers in the RFP process on your end of the process by putting the data together, and your plant professionals or whatever type of procurement you're doing. Put as much information as you can in the RFP, you get a better proposal because it's data driven, it's fact driven. There's very little guesswork. Identify clear criteria. This is what's very good in the statutes that have been passed for best value contracting. The performance specifications, the technical specification. You give very little leeway. I always say it's an objective way to do subjective determinations. That's one of the things that you see in Chapter 30B, Section 6. I have to watch my time. You have standardized criteria. Everybody knows the yardstick against which they'd be measured. The contract should always be appended to the RFP. It leaves less guesswork for what you're going to be contracting for and what the terms and performance standards will be. That's again just request for proposals processes, the design and construction responsibility. I want to get into just briefly the roles of the contractor in this case. You want to contract for performance. You're going to contract by performance standards. That's very important. So the contractor is going to have quite often the risk to complete design, the responsibility to complete design. Depending on what type of design build project you do, you will determine at what point, at what percentage of design plans you go out on the street. 25% design plans mean it's going to be a more of a design build project than if you go out at 100% design plans. So that's something you have to determine. What are you actually contracting for? Operation, you need to clearly define performance standards, risk sharing, contracts, insurance, and indemnity, all key components. As our earlier speaker said, he could spend 16 hours on just the presentation he had today. I could spend an equal amount of time on letting you know what contract components you need to protect a municipality, or if I'm representing the joint venture entity, to protect the joint venture entity in one of these deals. That takes a lot of time, and hopefully this forum has been wonderful. Hopefully if we do a follow-up sometime on technical issues or legal specific issues, I could spend more time and help your communities make sure they're protected. The key contract terms: cost sharing, revenue sharing, insurance and indemnification, risk assignment, performance guarantees. These are just a whole host of everything that you want to. But for our purposes, when we're a municipality, we want to look at two things: revenue sharing or cost avoiding. And some of my case studies talk about that. Okay, C, the ABC is C equals contracts and performance. Those are some of the things you want to make sure you have, as I just talked about. And this is one of the case studies. Before I go into this case study, which I'll go over really quickly, I want to go over a couple other things we've done public-private partnerships with some of my clients. Imagine this: a golf course, public-private contract project. It was 9 holes. We wanted 18 holes. This was actually mirrored after legislation that was done in Plymouth. Plymouth did a golf course in a park, I think, on home rule legislation, which I then used as a way to expand the golf course from 9 to 18 holes. It's a design, build, operate. We take a project and we say, we want you to come in, design, build a 9-hole expansion. In exchange for that, you get a 20-year lease to operate this golf course. That's a public-private partnership. One of the public-private partnerships I was working on in Taunton before I left, and is on hold now since I left, was in the healthcare industry. Healthcare is another great opportunity for public-private partnerships. We had a standalone nursing home, one of the last municipally owned nursing homes in the state. We want to figure out how to keep that viable. There was 26 acres next door. I said, it's simple. You do a public-private partnership. You lease out that 26 acres for an assisted, low to moderate assisted living facility, and then you cross-utilize services between that facility and the nursing home, so you have a public-private partnership. Private management, public employees doing both. That's another example of a public-private partnership. We were talking earlier about the Cape's water and wastewater issues. Well, I know everybody's seen wastewater treatment plants and water treatment plants privatized. Has anyone seen a collection system privatized? Well, I did that too. We've privatized the wastewater collection system because if the plant is under private operation, it only makes sense to have the collection system also under private operation. So there's a number of examples. I could go on with so many more examples of public-private partnerships. In Fall River, what we're doing now, we have one of those old sludge incinerators. We're going to take that down. We're going to put advanced technology system in there to turn, instead of burning the sludge, we're probably going to gasify it or digest it, create a syngas, combust it on site to generate electricity. Great project. Another public-private project we're working on is post-closure of landfills. Post-closure of landfills with photovoltaic solar arrays to collect sunlight and power the facility next door. One of the things we're working on to get into the energy area. Energy is a perfect opportunity for public-private partnership. Chapter 25E that was passed by the legislature recently that allows energy performance contracting, perfect examples of where a city and town can contract with one of these energy performance contractors or energy performance services to turn municipal buildings not only to lower their electrical costs, but to turn them into a source of revenue from net metering. So those are a number of the opportunities. I probably went over my time period, and I apologize. There's so much information. Public-private partnerships drive economic development. They make projects affordable. Again, remember, the lawyers quote other people's monies. Transfer design, construction, development responsibility, and they improve the quality of delivered services. I'm sorry if I spoke a little fast. I'm like the fellow in that Federal Express commercial when I have a time limit. Thank you, and good luck on all your projects. Too, sorry.
Gotta watch lawyers.
Exactly.
Always have to keep your eyes on the lawyers. One of the last points he made regarding capping landfills and using them for solar and selling the energy. Town of Kingston is just in the process of doing that very successfully, and will be able to, actually town meeting already wants to spend the money they're saving on that. So that is another way to go. So thank you, Stephen. That was very informative and entertaining. Our last speaker for the day is Paul Niedzwiecki, who I've had the pleasure of working closely with for many years. Paul is the Executive Director of the Cape Cod Commission, a regional land use planning and regulatory agency created in 1990 to serve the citizens in the 15 towns of Barnstable County. The Commission's mission is to manage growth, protect Cape Cod's unique environment, and foster a healthy community for present and future generation. Paul has served in a variety of posts in the public sector throughout his illustrious career. Before joining the Commission in 2007, he served as Assistant Town Manager for the town of Barnstable, where he oversaw revitalization work for downtown Hyannis, including the establishment of Barnstable County's first gross incentive zone. And his expertise have improved and enriched the entire Cape region. So thank you for joining us today.
Well, good afternoon. Paul Niedzwiecki, Executive Director of the Cape Cod Commission. I've been Executive Director for about 3 years now. So I think my job here, batting cleanup, is to put some local context on some of the public-private partnership talk that we've heard to date. So the regulatory framework, at least on the county level, has changed significantly in the last 3 years. But my computer skills are pretty much the same. Yeah, I screwed it up. That button, but the one with the arrow on it. Public-private partnerships, here we go. You know, one of the public-private partnerships that I like to talk about a lot is the economy itself, which is a public-private partnership really between government and the private sector. So on the private side, we look for the private side for the provision of goods and services. But the public side, that public responsibility is about infrastructure, primary education, research and development, and regulation. So, you know, we have on the county level right now a lot of public-private partnerships. When I read the definition that they put up originally, I said, hey, we do a lot of that already. Open Cape is one of the examples that, the shining examples of a public-private partnership now. It's really a nonprofit group that started a broadband initiative for Massachusetts and really sort of focused on the Cape. There's been a lot of focus in Western Mass on the same sort of broadband initiative. The only project to be funded on the federal level in a significant way is the Cape project, the Open Cape project. I think they have about $40 million in grant money now between the 35 from the feds and another 5 from the state for that broadband initiative. And this really is the future of economic development on the Cape. That crossing, that technological bridge over the canal is the most significant thing we've done for economic development and economic progress, at least in the last 20 years. But Open Cape is a prototypical public-private partnership. The funding from the federal government is there to build that middle-mile broadband network. And the building and the operation of the network will be done by a private sector corporation. So that Open Cape is that public entity that's going to oversee a lot of that private sector operation, construction that initiative. The mechanism is Open Cape, and it's a nonprofit corporation. And that's a good example, but it's only one example. We also have another example at the commission that we've just entered into lately, which is a partnership with IBM. And so we entered into that public-private partnership 2 months ago, and that's really to begin to look at a strategic information office, how we use information regionally, and how we can use that to find better answers to the challenges that we face in the future. So that's moving along. The space that we're working in with IBM in initially is really the water space, because a lot of the discussion here today is going to be put to use in trying to sort of solve the wastewater problem that we're facing. And the issue of nutrient management and the degradation of our southern estuaries and embayments is really the #1 environmental issue facing the Cape today. But it is also a tremendous economic development opportunity. So that IBM partnership that we're working with, we actually had a meeting 3 weeks ago, Daniel Webster Inn, right down the street, where we had 22 IBM executives globally that came to Sandwich to look at this particular issue that we're dealing with now. And we're hopeful that we'll be able to collect information and organize it and use it in a way that will allow us to react in a less capital-intensive way to fix some of the problems that are out there. Having said that, capital infrastructure is undoubtedly going to be necessary. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the presentation. But I guess as the regulator, I'm here to talk about regulation. So this is the regional policy plan, the cover to it. And our growth policy there is really to guide growth towards areas that are adequately supported by infrastructure and away from areas that must be protected for ecological, historic, or other reasons. We have basically 4 partnership projects that we started 3 years ago when I became executive director, and it was a way to reform the current regulatory process to support these growth principles. In those areas where we have adequate infrastructure or we know we're going to build adequate infrastructure, we need to get out of the way as it relates to regulation. And so that's what we've tried to do and work with these partnerships. So the first partnership is really partnerships with the towns. And that was the creation of land use vision maps, which identified in those towns economic centers, industrial areas, village centers, and other areas, as well as resource protection areas. So this is the framework that we're working in now when you come to the commission, and we have 9 of the 15 towns that have completed land use vision maps now. And in these areas and economic centers, we can raise thresholds, and that provides significant opportunity over what existed before, which was really a one-size-fits-all approach to regulation. The second piece are thresholds. The threshold is what trigger some commercial entity is going to hit that's going to involve a regional review, going to trigger that regional review. So we can increase thresholds now in vision centers, village centers, economic centers, and industrial service and trade areas, industrial areas, and we can lower thresholds in resource protection areas. So away from this one-size-fits-all approach, it used to be before if you were a commercial development, 10,000 square feet or more, you triggered commission review no matter where you were. That sort of one-size-fits-all approach did not benefit the Cape for a long period of time, and certainly will not benefit us trying to grow in appropriate areas. So we've changed that. And these are the threshold ranges that change. So you can see economic centers, you can get relief up to 30,000 square feet, industrial areas up to 40,000 square feet, village to 10, resource protection areas. So that's an example of these thresholds that are lifted now and are different. And there's a good example that has come up recently with a new company in Bourne that takes household waste and fuses it through a chemical process into a brick, and then they ship it to the Midwest and they burn it in coal plants at a much lower sulfur content. So this technology was developed by 2 gentlemen here on the Cape who had second homes on the Cape and retired, but were far too young to and I guess weren't great golfers. So they needed something else to do, so they started this company. This company is opening up a shop in Bourne as we speak, but it's also looking to expand. And the state's trying to drag them off Cape to Worcester, of all places. But what they need on the Cape.
Not while I'm here. Not while I'm here.
Thank you, that was for your benefit.
Thank you.
But what they need is they need a 35,000 square feet. They need to be able to build a 35,000 square foot building. They need 3 to 5 acres probably to do it. It's a completely self-contained chemical process. They employ about 60 people at an average wage of about $68,000 year-round. Now, we can do that. We can do that now because we changed the regulations. In industrial service and trade area, you can raise those thresholds to 40,000 square feet. You don't have to come to the Cape Cod Commission for that project. Having said that, not one town has come forward to apply for increased thresholds. So as much as the commission has been criticized over a long period of time, nobody has yet taken us up on that offer to raise those thresholds. To the point that David Willard and I from the County Economic Development Council are on tour with local chambers, going to local chambers who we seem to have more in common with now than some of the towns, and trying to push them to push local leaders to adopt land use vision maps and to raise thresholds. So that's sort of the sea change that's happened at the Cape Cod Commission as it relates to thresholds and the way that we regulate. Limited review, another option that we did. And it used to be that when you triggered Cape Cod Commission review, we have a regional policy plan. It has over 200 minimum performance standards in it and a whole host of areas. And we measured every project against every minimum performance standard. That's no longer necessary. Now you can scope that project. And if your only impact is transportation, then you'll only be reviewed for transportation. So we have limited that review. And this is an example of our limited review checklist now. And as we move forward, what you'll be able to do as a potential applicant is really access the Cape Cod Commission website, put some information about your project in there, and it will let you know what your interaction with the Cape Cod Commission is going to be, and start to limit that scope and that review. The other piece is growth incentive zones. Growth incentive zones was explained earlier. When I was the assistant town manager in Barnstable, we did the first one in downtown Hyannis. And the growth incentive zone is different than the other kinds of regulatory relief, which just allow you to build bigger buildings in certain areas. A growth incentive zone really requires the town to come forward with a master plan for a particular area, and then to request from the commission cumulative relief. So in the downtown area of Hyannis, for example, 600 residential units and 500,000 square feet of commercial space was made available to the town to parcel out as it saw fit, consistent with its master plan. And so that really shifts a lot of the responsibility onto the town and gives them a great deal of flexibility going forward. Growth incentive zones are incredibly powerful tools, especially when you're looking at revitalizing or redevelopment a particular area. And why? Why are we going to this method now? Well, it is about smart growth, although that term is certainly overused and a little bit trite. But the difference between low density and high density is the difference between a municipal government with a structural deficit and one without one. Really the cost of expanding infrastructure, and that's what we're seeing here on the Cape now. We've had unprecedented population growth over the last 30 years. And now we're having to expand infrastructure to deal with that, to deal with the residue of human existence that happens when you allow population to grow and especially to sprawl. In some communities, there was an effort towards 2-acre zoning as a way to limit the number of people that could build on the Cape. But in fact, that just exacerbated the situation because people built on those 2-acre lots and more. And now we have a situation where we have to extend infrastructure to those homes. And at that point, we can't afford it. I mean, the financing of public infrastructure is pretty straightforward. The more ratepayers you have on a shorter length of pipe or on a road, the more sustainable that system is. So there's a significant financial incentive for smart growth in communities. And why density is more attractive. Well, dense development is consistent with the past and can improve the community character. This is a picture of Main Street Hyannis with Puritan clothing up there, which is in a historic building. It's a great looking building. That's the brick building there. But the rest of it, you'd look at there and you'd think strip malls were invented on Main Street in Hyannis. But yet it's sort of locked in that regulatory framework. With the growth incentive zone, this is the kind of development you can see on top of it. So it is consistent with the past, and it can definitely improve community character going forward. So that is basically the end of my presentation, but I did want to say Open Cape is a public-private partnership, as I explained earlier, that we're doing. IBM is a new one that the county has taken on, and there are others out there too. We did 1,000 hours worth of work in the town of Yarmouth with our reset team to look at the Parkers River area, and there's a marina project there that's essential to sort of economic progress in that area. That they're looking at design-build options for marinas too. So we have to use these tools in these economic centers. And another reason why we're reaching out to the EDICs and the local chambers is that as the commission moves to implement the regional policy plan, we look in these economic centers and we're trying to help communities spark economic development there. We need to rely on those local institutions, the local chambers, the local EDICs, who know what's going on in those economic centers. That's the only way we're going to be able to develop policies that make sense and that have a likelihood for success. There are other opportunities out there now. There's a major shell fishing industry on the Cape. Thousands of jobs associated with it. There's one place where everyone gets the seeds, and that place is in the town of Dennis and soon could be out of business. And that's going to have a massive impact on the local economy down here. The county, when we've had some discussions about it, should look at ways to help that aquaculture resource center survive. And public-private partnerships is a potential model to help that happen too. So in many ways, we're already doing a lot of these things on the county level. We don't have a lot of options. And public-private partnerships are important. On the IBM side, competition is important. We're locked in a position in a partnership with IBM right now, but we have certain resources at the commission. They have certain resources to design certain things, and there's a little bit of a competition now between the commission and IBM as to who can produce the better work product. It's a friendly competition, but it's going to lead to a better result. Even internally at the commission, we have internal competition between the GIS department and the planning department over who can produce the best product there. So competition is good. It will lead to a better result. And I do want to say, with all of these public-private partnerships that we're exposed to, whether it's Open Cape or IBM or several others that are available on the regional level now, I don't recall a lot of the issues with the administration of those. It's not problematic. The most problematic partnerships that I see on a daily basis are public-public partnerships. They can be very difficult. Regional town partnerships, partnerships with state universities at times, all of these have produced a lot of tension, but it's not the public-private partnerships that are tough to administer at times. So I think we have to keep that in mind. And just going back to sort of Hyannis, the growth incentive zone, where it all started, there's been a lot of discussion about urban renewal and some of the tools that are available on the state level. When we first decided to revitalize Hyannis and move forward with it, we wanted to adopt a provision of the Massachusetts General Laws that created a community development board, which is a redevelopment authority light, a very light version of that. And so we started to move through the process, and people started to read through that provision of the general laws, and they came across the word eminent domain. And I remember the town manager at the time saying, well, what's the deal? What does eminent domain mean? And I said, well, I'm a lawyer, so I can tell you that eminent domain is Latin for we need a new town manager. So it's not as easy as it sounds to move it through the local process. But it is essential. It's a very important part of this regulatory structure that we need in order to move forward and to do what we need to do. There are significant parts of the Cape that need to be redeveloped. And we need to reinvest in those areas. And we need to stop sprawling into those areas that we know only produce short-term gains for towns and while producing long-term liabilities. Thank you very much.
That concludes our panel discussion for this program, and that company that Paul talked about, didn't know, is the administration trying to move them to Worcester?
Yeah, this is the lieutenant governor.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's a company that came to us early last year, was it, Sam? And said, we have this product. We looked at the product. We said, are there any chemicals or emissions from the product? No, nothing. This is an amazing product, and it will reduce emissions, sulfur emissions, by 25% in coal burning plants. We have a rule in Massachusetts, you can't burn trash here, but it's going all across the rest of the country, and we hooked them up. That NIMAC I talked about earlier, Northern Ireland, Massachusetts connection, it's not just health, it's technology. We got them into Derry, we got them into Belfast, we got them into Donegal, and they're already getting licensing agreements. That means jobs here, jobs here. So we are going to open this up for questions. There's a mic. If you approach the mic and just say your name, a company, whatever you're associated with. And Chris and I are going to be part of the panel. So we will open it up for questions. It only takes one. Okay.
There we go.
Hi, my name is Harry Shamir. I'm from Plymouth. And I'm not associated with any big organization at all. As a matter of fact, I'm a little entrepreneur. Discussing my needs with I forget the name right now. It's an organization by Massachusetts. And we've identified a problem that is holding back the development of new ideas and new concepts all over the world, all over the country, Massachusetts. We have a large number of unemployed technical people of very high caliber. Speaking from experience, because I was one, the holdback from having these people create new products that would eventually generate employment, work, income, tax, whatever, is the fact that there is no money to start up things at the incubator level. Everybody who used to be an angel, private angel investor, has literally flown away. There isn't anymore. We need another source of funding for the incubation period of new company development. It's lacking. And public-private, okay, it's a nice motto. Let's try to put it to work where it counts, not at the macro level of large structures, but at the small level where 2, 3, 4, 10 such individuals can actually come and work, do their thing, not be burdened with expenses. This is the province of the public investment, and thereafter provide a revenue to the public because some of their ideas actually worked, and create the new employment possibilities. Transistors were invented by 2, 3 people in a lab. That's it. Okay, look what it gave us today. So I call upon Ms. Murray, you who can do it, to create such public incubators such that small people like me can go in, do our thing, and become fat and sassy. Thank you.
Does anyone want to talk about you want to talk about broadband? That would certainly be a place for a startup company that can use the new building the new public facility building once it's finished in Hyannis.
Yeah, I think part of the model that we're looking at now is more of a decentralized, less of a bricks and mortar economic development. You know, IBM is a good example. They've got 400,000 employees globally, and of the 22 business execs that came 3 weeks ago, only 3 of them go to a building at all to work. So I think that tends to decrease some of the older thoughts about what you need in order to develop on the bricks and mortar side. But more important, you're talking about capital assistance for startup on research and development. And there are several funds that are available, Coastal Capital, there are some local funds that are available. The question is whether they can leverage enough for some of the startup efforts that you're talking about. But I would encourage you to contact the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce and Coastal Capital to see if the programs that they have and the amount of capital they have to invest in those programs are consistent or are enough. But I know exactly what you're talking about. There's that space in between where venture capital and a lot of the angels have gone away and they haven't come back. So there's some ability to deal with this on a smaller level.
We're in touch with the MSBCC, and the one thing that they have provided excellent management and advisory assistance.
Right.
But one thing is obvious: they don't have money, and they don't know where to get it. Okay? This has to be now created, these funds. Unfortunately, they hit us right when nobody has any money at government level.
Yeah.
Okay? But yay, either you save today and not have tomorrow, or you invest today what you may not have too much of, but tomorrow there is.
There are actually two funds, and my aide just reminded me. The Mass Life Science Center has Life Science Center you can apply to, or the Growth Capital Initiative, which we put into the Economic Development Bill, will also have money to lend. So if you can contact my office and we'll connect you with them, or you can go on the government website and you can get connected to them. The Growth Capital Initiative.
My name is Jerry Thomas. I'm with the town of Falmouth, up to my eyeballs and higher on wastewater planning. And the issue I have is, how do we educate not only local leaders but also legislatures, not you of course, on the need to do alternative delivery projects. I've been told, I don't know if it's 100% true, but there is education that's needed at the lower level, because a lot of our local leaders frown upon it because it means signing a contract, mistrust, I guess. And the other thing I heard is getting through the regulatory requirements at the state make it very, very difficult. That there's probably one gentleman, I think his initials are IG, that make it very difficult to try to get these, so that as a local manager, I can't even hope to bring people, and this is not just for wastewater, but just the whole public-private, when I have hurdles down here and I have hurdles up there. So I didn't expect an answer today. I was glad I heard from everybody, but I think the challenge for me and on the Cape is how to bring these alternatives together. I think a tangential issue is that the regulations drive us. And we have regulations in Massachusetts that says we can't put it on the land, we can't put it in the ocean. Well, what do you want us to do with it? I think the legislature has to start thinking of public-private relationships, and if a community is willing to step up and an engineering firm or developer and says, we will deliver this and we will guarantee environmental protection, then maybe the permitting process, I'll say is made easier, but there's a bottom line that all signatories will deliver, that you will meet the environmental protection needs of the community. And lastly, for the legislatures here, next Wednesday at the Omni Parker House, there's a legislative breakfast on wastewater needs, sponsored by the Massachusetts Water Pollution Control Association. I urge all of you to attend, or at least send one of your environmental aides, because the Senate committee and a representative committee did look at some very interesting ways of how to fix this issue, and I think it's very timely. Thank you.
I think Senator Eldridge is heading that up, is he not?
To quote a former Massachusetts politician, I think you may all recognize the quote immediately, all politics are local. Somebody by the name of O'Neill? Yeah. What you reference is a very common problem, and I like to refer to it as institutional inertia. Government entities build up a pattern of saying this is the way we do things, and to change that and shift that requires we go back to all politics is local. It has to be a massive education effort. I realize it doesn't occur overnight. It's ongoing. Our website, ncppp.org, has got all kinds of information that can be used in an educational effort. And I think it's important to understand that NCPPP is a 501c3, just like a college. Our membership is made up of both public and private sector organizations. We're not a trade association trying to market services. We're trying to educate people about a concept. One of the things that we have seen work in some occasions, and this is something that the Senator might be able to help us with, is if you have small cadres, and your reference to this meeting that's coming up next Wednesday, I think is an excellent opportunity of having small educational sessions. I realize that legislators don't have time to sit down for 6 or 8 hours. They've got to have an hour or two, talking points, etc. Staff can maybe stay a little bit longer, but I think those kind of educational efforts are probably what you're going to need here in Massachusetts to kind of take it to the next step forward. You've got a starting point, but I think some of that education is going to have to be done.
One of the things we had included in the economic development bill that didn't survive in the conference was to sunset every one of these agencies and have them prove their worth the next every 10 years. And I'm going to try to push that again this session, because we build on regulations and regulations, and we have too many regulations on our books. We have to revisit all these regulations and say why we're not what's stopping the creation of business. Not harm the environment, but and that's just one area, but we do have a number of regulations, both in the local level and the county level and the state level, that prevent businesses from being created. See?
Oh, thank you, Senator President. There's a two-part process. The first, as you mentioned, was the public information process as to why you need to improve the collection and wastewater treatment system. That should be pretty evident to homeowners and to taxpayers with respect to the sewer bills that will continue to go up and up when you have to make significant improvements to a wastewater treatment plant or collection system, or you need to put a wastewater collection system in place because of the current situation with respect to Title V. The second process is a process I could spend quite some time talking about, but it's a legislative process. What we don't have and what is standing in your way of a process that would work best for your community is the fact that procurement and services are bid separately in Massachusetts. In order for you to have a true public-private partnership in wastewater collection, water treatment, and water distribution, is to have a statute that allows you to do both services and construction. I wrote a statute like that last year. We have not filed yet. We need a little bit more buy-in from the water and wastewater industries, and hopefully you'll see that at a future legislative session. It's modeled after home rule petitions that have been done in 14 communities. And those 14 communities had home rule petitions for their water and wastewater collection systems, because at the time, if you remember the last 20 to 30 years, there's been a lot of emphasis by the US EPA. There was just a Globe article over the weekend, the US EPA and Mass DEP, to improve the quality of the water that is discharged into the public waterways and to offshore locations. So these petitions and this, instead of having home rule petitions community by community, which of course you can file, a statute of general applicability allowing communities to enter into long-term 20 or 30-year contracts with the best qualified private vendor and for the best price to build or enlarge these treatment plants and collection systems is a good opportunity. I'd be glad to talk with you about the legislation. The other thing is, for those of you who have plants, we're only at the beginning. Most wastewater plants are going to have to be upgraded in the next 10 to 15 years, not for their own existing needs, but because of new regulatory and treatment standards that are going to be introduced into the effluent discharge. So, just a little bit.
Paul?
Thank you, Madam President. As you know, I serve at your pleasure on the State Water Infrastructure Committee that Senator Eldridge is overseeing. And there's a radical difference between the discussion that's happening on Cape Cod and the discussion that's happening in other parts of the state. In other parts of the state, they have existing infrastructure that they need to upgrade. And there's a significant need imbalance there. On Cape Cod, only 15% of our households are connected to any sort of centralized wastewater infrastructure at all. And we need to do significantly more than that in order to meet these total maximum daily loads that are established now. So we're talking out of 15 communities down here, we're talking about 11 that have virtually no infrastructure. So starting from scratch there presents tremendous financial disadvantages, but it also presents opportunities for alternative ways for regulators to look at how we do this. And what's clear to me is if we allow 15 towns with 15 different plans to go forward, we're going to wind up with a less effective system than we need to address the problem and a more expensive system than we can afford. So we really need to look at other alternatives beyond procurement about how we're going to stand together on this issue to be able to discuss about alternatives in a serious way with the Department of Environmental Protection on the state level and the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. I've had, over the last 2 months, the opportunity to sit in a room with EPA and the Department of Justice and DEP and the Conservation Law Foundation, and we don't have time. You know, we don't have a lot of time to figure this out. Because what's going to happen if the lawsuit moves forward and we wind up with a special master and that decision comes down, they're not going to care that we only have 15% of our households hooked up already. And we're going to wind up with a solution that is going to affect the socioeconomic diversity of the Cape and cause an economic dislocation that will last generations. I mean, we simply can't afford a $3 to $5 billion answer to this problem. So we've got to find a better approach that looks at a true watershed-based management plan. It looks at public-private options in those particular watersheds, but one that is going to be more manageable and less expensive. And we just don't have a lot of time left to do that.
And if we leave it to the courts, the cost, you're going to lose a lot of people who are on fixed incomes, who are going to have to pay betterment fees that will just be more than their taxes, and they will lose them too.
No, and there's a radical difference on the Cape between those people that live near the coast and some of the housing on the outer Cape, and those that live in the center. And if we want to have a middle class on the Cape going forward, we have to find a more rational way to have this discussion with state and federal regulators, and we need some help.
Sort of like homeowners insurance on the Cape.
Hi, I'm John Keenan. I'm an architect in Falmouth. The name of the firm is Keenan and Kenny. My partner, Antonio, is over here. We've done public projects for 30 years on the Cape. I have 3 questions for the panel. One deals with the example of a public-private, like what happened in Fort Devens. A firm gets a huge tax incentive. They get a lot of money to build a plant. They're gone. They're going to China. How do you stop that loss of not just the revenue, but jobs and things like that? Why can't you hold these people to stay longer? That's one question. The other one is, what we've seen in the business is a lot of the design-build effort is overwhelming the traditional architect's job. And I would just ask you, or try to find out, a lot of the projects are money-driven. They're driven by the developer, or they're driven by, well, it's usually economics. And I don't want to see the good design and good architecture get thrown away. You've seen where it works in Mashpee Commons and downtown Hyannis and other projects, but you've got to keep the good architects and the good engineers involved. Just as important as the financier, that's all I'll say, or the lawyers. And the other thing is the public bid laws. Is the file sub-bid law going to go away someday?
I don't know. It comes up every year. It goes down every year.
And I wish we could educate the towns and people who are committees about the fact that you can tell a low bidder that he's not going to get the job. He's not qualified. You can, but most of them won't do it. And it just creates heartache for everyone involved in that project. A project like the Falmouth High School, for instance, perfect example. So that's my 3 questions. Thank you.
On the third, just for as far as the schools, I think we've got that, and I know the architectural community was not happy when we went with this, when we changed the way we finance schools now.
Yep.
But you sat at the table with the state and with the secretaries, the treasurer's office, and came up with an idea on how, as each school, so architects are involved as each new school gets approval. The cost of schools has gone down, the quality of schools being built is going to be better,
I think that's a good system.
and it worked out great. So I can answer to that one, and I'll throw open the others.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that, you know, we don't care about design.
Well,
That's
you're
not,
an architect.
Yeah, it doesn't, that's not it at all. I think what happens is that design is critically important because that's going to help sell the project as much as anything. I mean, I don't think anybody just sits back in a room and says, well, if I cut the bejesus out of this thing, I'm going to make a lot of money and I can't sell it to anybody, or I can't lease it or rent it. So in that regard, I would say that design is critically important, and it'll be driven by the economy. It reminds me that story about the city manager and when the Cape Cod Commission was thinking about Hyannis, you know, that you can't, if you use the urban renewal laws, the eminent domain, it would kill you. I think you should talk to the lieutenant governor, because in Worcester, he seemed to be able to do that. And didn't, it didn't hurt him. And so in that regard, I just wanted to say that. But and in regard to the earlier question, Mass Biomedical Initiative is a perfect example of an incubator that is working. It does work. It's a great program. It's also funded by the state on a yearly basis. So that is something you could talk to, look at yourself. So thank you.
And as far as the creation of Devon's, you mentioned Devon's and the solar, what's the name of the company? Evergreen.
Evergreen.
Oh, everyone's heard about Evergreen.
Yeah.
Should have been a much stronger clawback. The Life Science Center that does grants that we work with all over the world and all over the country, we have a clawback. You don't create the jobs here, you give us the money back. That should have been part of that. Why that clawback wasn't there, I don't understand. I understand the lending and the initial, because when they first started, the state gave them $2 million. They paid us back 11. So it was a good investment. To do the expansion at Devon's, they still hired 800 people for over 3 years, but to cut that off and leave and pay us so little in response to that, there had to have been a bigger clawback, and obviously the legislature wasn't involved in that. But and I doubt if you will see another contract like that go through.
All right, thank you.
We have time for one more question. Unless you want to stay.
Yeah. My name is Patrick Campbell. I'm a 20-year summer visitor to the Cape and a recent relocated permanent resident. But my background is in large-scale, mixed-use, vertical redevelopment, and particularly public-private redevelopment on an urban scale. And I'd like to offer a couple of observations coming from that point. And that is that it strikes me as a little bit strange that the land use regulations and the planning on the Cape is regional. It's largely driven by the commission, but the deals are all local. And so you get into this strange conundrum where you try and make a local deal with local money, and then you have to go get regional approval and often a regional no. And most of the world, you know, where I come from, and all of the employers that you seek don't think of the Cape as 15 municipalities. They think of it as one place. And if they are wanted and you want to lure them to the Cape, you have to lure them as a region. And you have to market the place as a region, and you have to have demographic information that speaks to this gentleman's assertion that there's lots of smart people sitting on their hands and are underemployed on the Cape. And you have to have that information on a regional basis to say that within X miles of Barnstable County, there aren't 100 people who have the biotech knowledge you're looking for. There may be 10,000. And I've gone looking for that information, and I can't find it. You know, I have people who are in those businesses, and they say, well, it's great that there are towns on the Cape that have buildable land and it's correctly zoned, and they want to roll out the red carpet, but how many potential employees are there that could occupy those buildings if they were built? And I don't know where to find that information, and I would urge you to have a clearinghouse that provides it.
Employment bureaus. Paul, do you have?
Yeah, at the Cape Cod Commission website, we have a lot of that information on hand. Unfortunately, when I got there 3 years ago, they had a sort of historic filing system, and a lot of it was in paper on there. But with the help of Barnstable County and the County Economic Development Council, we've been able to modernize that. We have a website now called Stats Cape Cod, and the new Cape Cod Commission website should be up and running in 60 days. And it will be that kind of clearinghouse for that kind of information.
Very good. Okay.
Last question. I'm a little small guy on Cape Cod. I came here to try and understand what this committee can help me with my business. I run a telecommunications company. I've worked all over the country, done big jobs as well as little jobs. Working in many of the school districts, town halls, municipalities, one of the things that I see of late is people coming over the canal, people coming over the bridge, from Pittsfield, from Springfield, from Worcester, from all these other towns, and my friends that I work with, the guys that I employed, don't have work. We can't find work. We're locked out because we're not in a union. We're locked out because we don't do the big contracts, but yet we can still do the little jobs. We can do the rewiring of a town hall, the rewiring of a police station, and this work ends up going to somewhere else. Now, ironically enough, they do call us now and again to do the final build-out, building the frame. Somebody else has pulled the wire. Somebody else has designed it and laid it out, and they call us in to terminate the wire and make it run. That is a sticking point to me. It really bothers me to see people right here in the Cape, because we are so limited as to what we do. There's no big industry down here. There's no big manufacturing plants down here. We have hotel, motel, and restaurants and retirement community. That's about it. But we still have schools, we still have town halls, we still have hospitals that have to be built and maintained. And it just doesn't seem fair that we're not getting the fair shake at these jobs.
Well, in one respect, as it relates to energy efficiency, I know the Cape Light Compact is a municipal aggregator, and they've got a lot of money that goes into energy efficiency, upgrading your homes. And it was some of the state requirements, procurement requirements, that forced them to be less reliant on local contractors than I think they could have been. That's recently changed. So I think that there are other people out there with similar issues, and we need to make those contracts more accessible to the local workforce so that we don't have to hire people off Cape to come on Cape to do the jobs that we know that we can do here.
That's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see our people here on Cape get the first shot at these jobs, and not somebody from Pittsfield. Thank you.
One more.
One more, only because it's one topic that I haven't seen mentioned this evening, so I just want to make sure that it gets mentioned. My name is Giselle Gauthier, and I'm the Director of Housing Development for Housing Assistance Corporation, and we do a fair amount of affordable housing development. And I just want to make sure that the fact that housing is a major piece of economic development in the public-private partnership, housing needs to be a public-private, providing the housing that we need in order to have the economic growth that we'd like to have is a really important piece of the public-private partnership as well. And I just want to make sure that that gets said out loud.
Just that's an important issue. And the town of Yarmouth quite recently just came through the commission. They permitted, or gave an exemption to the Simpkins School there. They're redeveloping that into 65 units, 100% affordable, and that is a public-private partnership. So that's an example of us moving in the right direction there.
Well, thank you. Thank the panel for being here. I'm going to turn this over to Chris.
Thanks. Yeah, you got my section. That's